Hello, this is Peter Falk, and you're listening to the Columbo Files on the Ludic Lounge, hosted by Antonicus Maximus and John Soares.
Hello, good listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Columbo Files, hosted by the Ludic Lounge. I am your co-host, John Soares, and with me, as always, as is forever, the man, the myth, the legend, the booty himself, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV. Say howdy, partners, to the people, Anthony.
Well, howdy, partners, to the people.
That did not work as well as I thought it would. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing well. I am doing almost as well as Robert Culp in this episode in his fantastic private eye business. Because, God almighty, John, that size of the building and all of those gadgets.
I can't believe a private investigation agency owns an entire building like that. I guess it's just a sign of the times. And that is a sign, good folks, that we are talking about 1971's second official episode of the Columbo TV show, Death Lends a Hand, starring Peter Falk, as always. And this week, special guest star as our murderer, Mr. Robert Culp. One of 4 total appearances by Mr. Robert Culp, 3 of which he played the murderer. He plays a parent of, I believe, a suspect or a murderer in one of the later episodes. And fun fact, Anthony, did you know that he is the murderer in the one show that we were probably not going to talk about, but at some point we probably will? He was the murderer in the Mrs. Columbo show.
Really?
Yes. For those of you at home, while Peter Falk's Columbo always makes references to his wife, we never see her within the context of Columbo proper, but that did not stop TV studios from trying to cash in on money and fame. So they made a Mrs. Columbo spinoff starring Captain Catherine Janeway herself, Kate Mulgrew, as the good lieutenant's wife.
I have seen one episode of Mrs. Columbo, and the killer in that one was a familiar killer in the Columbo series who starred in multiple episodes, whose name is escaping me right now, but essentially he was the one who owned, in the episode where he owned the wine yard with like his
Pleasance.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's.
I like, my memory is a little fuzzy, and we're gonna have to like look it up and confirm next week, because I don't really want to look it up now. I think Mrs. Columbo did get like 13 episodes, and only one got broadcast, because I've only seen the one that's on the box set. There's only, I think they include one of the Mrs. Columbo episodes in the Columbo box set, but I think that's the only one that got broadcast, but I'm not 100% sure, because if you're saying Donald Pleasance is the murderer and I'm saying Robert Culp is the murderer, then we have a little bit of an issue.
No, the episode that I saw was on the Columbo DVD, and it was that was the big bad in that episode. So unless there are multiple episodes on the Columbo box set, which is possible, because like I said, It was a very short run for Mrs. Columbo. But like I said, if we could have a long reach goal, if we get a lot of supporters and they want us to do that, if you guys let us know, we can look into that. But as of right now, we're not going to be going over Mrs. Columbo. Our show, as we previously mentioned, is going to just solely focus on Columbo proper.
Yeah, but please let us know if that's something our good listeners would like to listen to. Now, going back to Robert Culp, he was a very well-known TV actor. He was also a voice actor, screenwriter, and director. Do you know what his first hit show was, Anthony?
his first hit show.
Yes.
I don't have that. I just have down that he started working in the year 1953's You Are There, which was a TV show.
Well, his first big show was a Western called Track Down, where he played Texas Ranger Hobie Gilman. That was, like I said, it was a Western that ran from 1957 to 1959 and was a spinoff of the anthology series Dick Powell's Zane Grey Theater. The premise of Track Down was Hobie Gilman would track down wanted fugitives across Texas. So it was a scenic show for at least half of that first season, and then they settled the show into a town called Porter, Texas, and that's where the majority of the show took place. Fun fact about Track Down, Anthony.
Besides the fact that it's very true to its name?
Yes, indeed. You got to love that 1950s literalism. Track Down is the only show to ever get endorsement by the state of Texas and the Texas Rangers.
Really?
The only show in the history of Hollywood and the state of Texas to ever get that honor. Between Track Down and his next show, he did a variety of guest stars and other, short-lived shows. His other biggest hit was a show that I believe you'll probably be familiar with, I Spy.
Yes, where he played opposite of Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby. It was a very young Bill Cosby. I believe it was one of the things that made Bill Cosby's career at the time. Robert Culp played CIA agent Kelly Robinson, and he acted opposite of Bill Cosby. It was a spy show. He wrote 7 scripts for I Spy, Anthony.
Wow, I didn't have any down writing scripts. That's awesome.
Yeah, he wrote 7 scripts. Even got an Emmy nomination for one of them. I believe he directed an episode as well.
Good on him. And you know what? I can definitely see him as a director. Just based off of the work he does on screen via this vehicle, and as well as I Spy that I've seen him in, and in addition to his other 3 appearances, he is definitely a professional. He is a pro's pro, if you will, John.
I would completely agree. There was also a reunion movie for I Spy in 1994.
I saw that, yeah. I did not watch the 1994 film, but I was very intrigued as to that.
Yeah, and I Spy was then, I believe, later remade as a Eddie Murphy vehicle.
With Owen Wilson, if I remember my facts correctly.
How do you go from Robert Culp to Owen Wilson? No offense to Owen Wilson, but it's just like, oh, wow, man. Well, come on, man. I'm a spy, man. Well, come on.
But, John, not only did he do those great and was a part of those great vehicles there, we have to also mention that he was in The Rifleman, Bonanza, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Outer Limits, and The Greatest American Hero.
Thank you for setting me up on that, because that is another one where Mr. Culp wrote and directed. He wrote and directed the season 2 finale of The Greatest American Hero. And for those at home, he played FBI agent Bill Maxwell, who was assigned to a high school professor who gets a super suit from aliens but doesn't have the instruction manual, so he doesn't know what he's doing. It's a superhero show that is considered a cult classic. It ran for about 3 years. They tried to reboot it not too long ago with a female hero. So I think they were still calling it The Greatest American Hero, but it just the pilot didn't get picked up. They filmed it and everything. It just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of times when they try to reboot these cult classics, if you will, a lot of times it just doesn't get the same appeal or doesn't get the same fan craze behind it. It just kind of peters out.
No, yeah, and it's just like the idea had its time, and I think some of them, I always advocate when you're doing reboots to get the ones that didn't really hit so much, and while I think Greatest American Hero is within that, I just, for whatever reason, that reboot just didn't pan out for, who knows, whatever reason. And hopefully someday maybe somebody will pick up the concept again and do something interesting with it. Some small little tidbits about Robert Culp before we move on. He was Ray Romano's father-in-law on Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yes, he was.
He had a part in Disney's Gargoyles as the voice of Halcyon Renard. I'm imagining that's a villain because I'm not too familiar with Gargoyles because it's been a while since I was a kid and watched it.
Yeah, another kind of, speaking of cult classics, one of the cults following cult classic from those in the 90s.
Basically our generation.
Yes, basically our generation, if you will. Now, John, one thing before you move on to your next point, I just want to say he was working all the way up to 2010.
Yeah, the time of his death. So he was
Right.
constantly working, very highly respected. One last role for the gamers in our audience. For those fans of Half-Life 2, he played the villain, Dr. Wallace Breen.
And that makes so much sense. Like, I didn't know that at the time, but now just when I read that and now hearing it from you, it perfectly fits. Like, just like a glove.
The thing I love about Robert Culp's performance just in general, and we'll talk about it more specifically in the episode, is that he does a great job with menace, like controlled menace. And that's something that I really appreciate every time I see him in his Columbo episodes. And they're honestly some of my favorite just because he's such a dynamite performer.
Yeah, and like you said, you mentioned his being controlled on that, and honestly, when he's not in control too, just his outbursts and how, like, I can believe, like, this man snapped, and again, just a testament to how well and what a pro's pro he was in general and in life.
Speaking of composed pros, Anthony, thank you for this setup. We can now talk about our other guest stars of this episode, because the husband to our victim, Mr. Arthur Kennicott, is played by a Hollywood legend named Ray Milland. Now, Ray Milland was a British actor who did work primarily in the studio system in Hollywood from 33 to 36. His big break comes, I believe, in 1936-37 when he gets the part in a movie called Three Smart Girls. From that movie, he goes back to the studio system playing bit parts and then is used as a test actor to find the newest Hollywood starlet for Universal, I believe, because Ray Milland at the time was under a Paramount contract. And for those of you not up on your Hollywood history, the way the system used to work back then is that movie studios would put actors under contract for a certain number of films, and if another studio wanted to use them, they had to negotiate with the movie studio in order to get them to be in that particular picture. And they were also very particular about finding a new starlet at the time, for the moment. So in this case, Dorothy Lamour was the starlet in question that Ray Milland was acting opposite of, and she was the star of a movie called The Jungle Princess. And when she got the part and realized Ray Milland was not going to be in the movie with her, she requested to the studio, "It's him or I'm out." I'm putting some words in her mouth because she, I doubt she was that frank about it, but she enjoyed acting with him so much that she wasn't going to do the movie without him. And that is what got him his big break as a leading man. Fun fact about Dorothy Lamour, and this is a little bit of a callback to a small little joke we played earlier on in this series. Dorothy Lamour was best known for being the female lead opposite Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. Everybody, Bob Hope in Crosby and Hope's Road 2 movies. They had a series of travelogue movies where they would just be the Road to Gibraltar or something like that, and it'd be some musical comedy where shenanigans ensue and casual racism.
Yeah, yep, and then just about every one of those films that they did together, it's almost the same plot, it's just a different setting, which was fantastic.
And I sing a different song every time.
Bing Crosby, everybody. Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. How about Bob Hope, everybody? Bob Hope. Did Bob Hope, everybody? That's all I can do for Bob Hope.
I do enjoy your limited fake Bob Hope. Sounds like an auctioneer, John.
And I got one Bob Hope, and I got two Bob Hope, and I got three. The pinnacle of Ray Milland's career comes in 1945 with Billy Wilder film The Lost Weekend. Billy Wilder is also one of the biggest names in directing. He was, I believe, a German director who got his first American film, which I've seen, and I don't even know if you can make this movie anymore. It's called The Major and the Minor. Also stars Ray Milland and Ginger Rogers.
Oh.
And it's a comedy. Ray Milland plays a major in the military who comes across the movie's focused on Ginger Rogers, and she is trying to get onto this train to return home for some personal business, but she's short and she can't pay the adult fare, but she can pay a half fare, which goes for a child. So grown-ass woman, Ginger Rogers, plays a 12-year-old named Zuzu.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then Ray Milland falls in love with her.
Oh.
It's not as creepy as you think. To be quite honest, it's a weird ass premise. It is a weird premise, but everything's up front. He's equally confused It's not something he wanted to do, but it's honestly a very delightful comedy. Milland and Ginger Rogers work very well off of each other, and it led to this movie, which is based on a novel titled The Lost Weekend, which was based on a book called by Charles R. Jackson. Now, The Lost Weekend is a drama that goes into the effects of alcoholism, because Ray Milland plays a writer who loses a weekend because he goes on a big bender, and then his life changes. It was nominated for seven Academy Awards and won 4. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And it also won the Grand Prix at the very first Cannes Film Festival.
Wow.
So it is one of 3 movies in history that have won the Best Picture Academy Award and won the highest honor at Cannes.
That is impressive.
So so Ray Milland is, in lack of a better term, he's Hollywood royalty, because he was very respected and very talented. He was also in some Hitchcock. He was in Dial M for Murder.
Yes, he
in 1954
was, as Tony Windus.
That is right.
Now, John, one
Yes,
thing
sir.
I wanted to mention about Ray Milland himself is that he was working in TV movies dating all the way back to 1928.
Yes.
That is incredible.
Yeah, to have that long of a career and to be that respected in it. And honestly, he gives a very subtle, complicated performance. And if you're not paying attention to it, you would kind of just brush it off as him phoning it in. But it doesn't really feel like he's phoning it in,
Do you think he's dialing in?
Good Lord. I was going to judge you for that, but you know what? I got to give you props.
Thank you.
That was well done.
Thank you.
Now, I think we can go to our murder victim, who does not have the longest of resumes, but is still important. Patricia Crowley, who played our victim, Lenore Kinnicutt. Patricia Pat Crowley did some film and some TV stuff. Anthony, do you know any of those?
Yes, she did a lot of the films that starred Jerry Lee Lewis and Dean Martin back in like the 1950s, 60s era, when they did a lot of their not buddy cop, but their buddy comedies, to where Dean Martin was the straight man to Jerry Lewis's crazy flamboyantness, if you will. She starred in The Wheeler Dealers, Money from Home, Hollywood or Bust. Again, just that was the main takeaways that I had from her days with Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin.
Hey, lady, it's Jerry Lewis over here. It's not Jerry Lee Lewis. That's a white boy from the South.
I made that mistake, and thanks for bringing it back up and shining my mistakes to light, John. I appreciate that.
Sorry, I had to do it as Jerry. She was also in Forever Female with Ginger Rogers and William Holden in 1953. TV-wise, she was in the Clint Eastwood vehicle, which launched his career, Rawhide. She did some episodes of that. She was in The Fugitive.
Yes,
she was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Hawaii Five-0, Charlie's Angels, Murder, She Wrote. Also acting on TV up through the 90s, because it goes Happy Days on the Love Boat, where she also starred, aren't in the 90s. But she had parts on Roseanne, Frasier, and Friends.
That's impressive. And she also, John, had a reoccurring role of the huge popular culture TV show in the 80s, Dynasty.
Dynasty. I think my dad watched Dynasty.
Well, who shot JR?
Oh, Jesus. Jeannie did.
Yes.
That's for putting me back in the bottle, you jerk. One day I will make the Great American Novel, where it just ties in all these TV characters together.
That would be impressive.
This giant revenge epic.
That would be impressive.
Like, you left me and changed your name to go mine oil in Texas. You jerk.
Now, speaking of interesting choices, John, the score this week around is not by Bill Goldberg.
No,
by Gil or Jill Mel, if you want.
I think it's Gil Malay.
Malay,
He has a
that's
little
probably better.
accent on his last name. Also, he doesn't score the whole thing. He doesn't make the theme. according to the credits of the episode itself, the theme was composed by a gentleman by the name of Henry Mancini. But I don't have much information on Mr. Mancini. But as for Mr. Millay, this is one of 4 episodes he scores, Anthony.
And you know what? One thing I did notice was the score, how the score is similar yet very different in select views. As we go on in the episode, John, there's actually a specific part that I'm going to bring up about the score and how I understand what Mr. Millay is going for, but it just didn't fit for me.
I think I know what you're talking about, and I'm inclined to agree. It's a very jazzy score that it makes some interesting choices, but we'll get into it as it comes up. The more notable credits outside of Columbo that Mr. Millay has, he did the TV movie of the $6 Million Man, which I imagine was probably just a pilot movie. He did Kolchak, which, if I recall correctly, was a cop show. And he did The Andromeda Strain, which is based off of a Michael Crichton novel or nonfiction novel. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember.
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure either.
But moving on to our director this week, Anthony, we have a new recurring director.
We do. Bernard Kowalski.
Kowalski.
You know.
It's like the penguins from Madagascar. Kowalski, hit it. So this is one of 4 episodes that Bernard Kowalski directs, including Columbo. He did episodes of Perry Mason, Rawhide, Gunsmoke, later in the 80s, Airwolf, and Knight Rider.
Oh, my gosh, Airwolf. Oh, you just unlocked a memory, John. Holy hell.
I'd never heard of Airwolf. I looked up the premise, and it's just like a bunch of people looking for a special machine has a given name. It's like, sounds suspiciously like Knight Rider.
Yeah, it was like Knight Rider, but with a airplane or helicopter.
It was a helicopter.
Yeah, helicopter. Oh, my gosh.
Now, another fun fact about Mr. Kowalski is that actor Brian Grazer is his nephew. Grazer works with Ron Howard a lot, and he also co-founded with Ron Howard Imagine Entertainment, which I believe is a production studio. He had parts in Splash, Apollo 13, which I believe got him an Academy nomination.
Yes.
He was also in A Beautiful Mind and Frost Nixon. Also of note, Stephen Bochco is still here. He is the story editor.
Oh.
I imagine Bochco is still the story editor, at least for the first 3 seasons, according to IMDb, because he does leave and, as we mentioned last week, become very prolific in the police procedural genre, among other things. Now, Anthony, that's all I have. Do you have anything else to add?
The only thing I want to add, John, before we jump into Act 1 proper, is that for the folks at home, the description of the episode is a simple premise. This is from the actual DVD of Columbo for this episode. The description of this episode, John, is an unfaithful wife, who is Lenore Kinnicutt, played by Patricia Crowley, is murdered after she refuses to be blackmailed.
It is a fascinating premise, and I think on that note, we can begin our discussion of Act 1. So Act 1. We open on a man shrouded in darkness double fisting guns and on a shooting range. Yes. Which I find kind of incredible because that's just like, that seems reckless. Also, where is everybody's ear protection?
Yeah, nobody had it on, and honestly, it was kind of cool looking for him to double fist guns. However, being a very, very amateur marksman, that would not probably actually happen, because typically with gun safety, and as this, who we later find out who's doing this, was a former policeman, he should know that you need 2 hands to secure a firearm to not have as much kickback as we did not see in this shooter.
Yeah, I think that's just the nature of how Hollywood wanted to portray certain things at a certain time, and then as time goes on, it gets portrayed more realistically. So we have a walking and talking scene, and we're shown that our murderer, Investigator Brimmer, we're never given his first name. We just know his last name is Brimmer. He's very exacting. He's very precise. He's very go, 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 do what I say, listen to my orders alone.
Very brash. He's walking.
Yes.
He's the one who's firing the guns. He's telling his henchmen, or the people who work
associates.
Associates, I guess, is a great term for it. He's telling them that the guns are shooting crooked. He's just filing out orders, barking orders at them, and getting updates as they're all walking and talking in this giant building that you later find out is his private investigative business, and it's very lucrative from just as huge as the building is and all the gears and gadgets that come with it.
And he's also he's very well dressed. He's got a nice 3-piece suit on.
Beautiful 3-piece suit.
Yeah, horrid tie though. It was just a loud 70s tie. Sometimes I like to describe people as animals. Mostly that comes out of a love of a private eye comic called Black Sad, where everybody's anthropomorphized animals. The reason I bring that up is that the people in those stories are animals that kind of reflect their personality. The lead character is a cat, and curiosity kills the cat, and so a cat as a private eye makes sense to some extent.
Yep.
So he feels like a hawk to me, Brimmer. He feels like a bird of prey who is very precise, exacting, and we come to learn later he is very quick-tempered. And do you feel like we can kind of see that in how he's handling things in this opening scene?
Yeah, just in this opening scene alone, John, you can tell. Again, that's why I use the word brash, because he is very much so barking orders. He's very cut and dry. I want this information now. This should have been done yesterday. Just your stereotypical jerk of a boss.
Now, Brimmer goes into his office to meet a newspaper man named Arthur Kennicott, played by Ray Milland. I equated him to a William Randolph Hearst type.
Exactly.
He owns multiple newspapers. He's very well dressed, very well to do, and he has contracted with Brimmer and Associates to investigate the possibility that his younger than him wife is possibly having an affair.
And this whole scene is under the guise of that Brimmer's having somebody listening in and watching this conversation he's having with Mr. Kennicott. And we're not really shown who that is until the end of the conversation. But from the conversation, John, Mr. Kennicott is told by Brimmer that his wife is not having an affair and that she has a clean bill of health.
Indeed, and that puts Mr. Kennicott at great ease. I want to take a moment, Anthony, to talk about the directing style here, because this is where my attention to the difference in the directing style was very marked here. I mean, it's hard to be fair when comparing anybody to Spielberg, because Spielberg is Spielberg. But honestly, I feel Spielberg is very much missed, at least the approach, because I felt like the style of how the camera was used here was very stiff.
Yes, I can see what you mean by it being stiff. One thing that I do want to talk about, and we'll get into this, there are some great moments of directing here. One of them will be coming up very shortly in the murder scene. Mm-hmm. However, there are how do I put this? There's a lot of jump cuts. There are a lot of things that just kind of put you off as far as this directing style. And again, like I said, we're comparing it to Spielberg of last week, which is totally unfair. However, it's hard not to compare it when we're literally watching the episode after.
Yeah. So I honestly felt like it was a lot more back and forth between, talking heads, where it's just like we'll cut to, Kennicott talking, or we'll cut to Brimmer reacting to what Kennicott is saying. I just missed the dynamism, or the dynamic nature of how the camera would be more focused on both of them in the same frame, as opposed to keeping them alone in each frame and then jumping back and forth. Now, post his conversation with Mr. Kennicott, Mr. Brimmer goes into the next room, and we find out who he has listening in, and it turns out it's Mrs. Kennicott, Lenore.
This scene, John, is a very intriguing scene, because he approaches Lenore and says, hey, I told your husband that you weren't cheating, as you previously saw, and goes into this monologue about how it's because he is doing this out of a sense of benevolence, a sense of like, oh, well, I have hundreds of these come across my desk, and yours was just seemed to be an innocent mistake.
Yeah, I noted that. He says he's a moralist.
And a rare breed of one at that.
Yeah, I don't... Like, I felt like he was just, telling on himself and contradicting himself. It's like, you're a moralist, but you are willing to go deep into the nitty-gritty of people's personal lives as a private investigator.
Yes.
So
it's setting up, and Lenore here is very relieved that he's not going to tell Mr. Kennicott that he lied until she's about to reach the door.
And there's a but to it all.
Yes, and she thanks him, to where Brimmer asks, well, how thankful are you? which starts the beginning of the theme we mentioned earlier about how cynicism works so well coming from Robert Culp in this episode.
Yes, indeed. When you first watched this, did you feel like it was Brimmer having the affair and he was just like, I'm giving you a clean bill of health because we're boinking?
Yeah, there was definitely a sense of that this was either an affair between themselves or that he was doing this for some sort of sexual act. Like, well, how thankful are you? Mentioned trying to start an affair with her.
Which isn't what happens. He is just looking for more information to support his private investigation business. Because of the number of papers Mr. Kennicott owns, he has a number of information sources. A lot of them will end up touching the political sphere. So what Brimmer is looking for Lenore to do is to use her connection to her husband to feed Brimmer with information that will be beneficial to him and beneficial to growing his business. Now, he threatens her with this. If she doesn't comply, he's going to tell Mr. Kennicott about the affair.
And this is one thing, John, where I was starting to question his motive for it, because essentially he's like, okay, well, then I'll tell the truth. But then again, he's starting to, if he does that and then tells Mr. Kennicott, it's only showing his incompetence in a sense, right? It's only showing like, hey, it's either going to go one of two negative ways. Mr. Kennicott's going to say like, oh, well, you lied to me, so I can't trust your business ethics or whatever have you. Or he's going to see Brimmer as incompetent, which again feeds more of a negative connotation on his business.
Which brings up the question of why is Brimmer taking such a risk? Because the way you just described it, Anthony, is exactly perfect, because he is literally shooting himself in both feet. If he tells Kennicott, well, your wife is having an affair, he's a liar and incompetent in Kennicott's eyes, because everything he just paid Brimmer for turned out to be not true. And now he has no reason to trust anything else Brimmer is saying. It's an interesting situation and with what comes later when we go to Brimmer's beach house.
Oh, and as we do, John, which I made a definite note, talking about the music score and talking about the directions, I wasn't too upset with this choice of music here. I really wasn't. It didn't quite fit for what I'm used to. It was more definitely of your 70s groove, kind of like funky music. But what I did appreciate was the direction of the video and the beautiful dusk drive going into Brimmer's house. I did enjoy that shot. It did remind me of the Spielberg shot of last week of how he would pan Jack Cassidy's vehicle as it's pulling into the driveway, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I did appreciate that. But the groovy music, it was fun. But again, it didn't really fit the sinister tone of Brimmer himself.
Yeah.
So this is where I started really noticing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, of what happens in just literally a couple minutes about music selection, music choice for it.
Yeah, it's a very jazzy, funky type score. It doesn't match, I guess, what we would picture. Would we call Columbo a noir to an extent?
To an extent, it's like a noir mixed with your, everyday 70s cop show.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So Brimmer goes to his vacation beach house and comes in to find Lenore Kennicott, who says, oh, our vacation house just happens to be 3 miles away. Did you know we were neighbors? I just decided to pop by, and you left your terrace door unlocked, which for a private investigator, he would leave his terrace door unlocked.
And also for a private investigator that has been investigating a client's wife, he didn't know that she only lived 3 miles away, which she throws in his face. And it essentially says like, oh, I thought a private investigator would know that I have a vacation home, or a weekend home, as she calls it. That's only 3 miles away. And John, before we move on from this point, I just want to talk about, again, we mentioned how well-to-do Mr. Kennicott was. But again, having the concept of having a weekend home.
No, I know. I can't even comprehend that.
It is almost incomprehensible to the point where it's like, I can't not see this happen in real life, but I guess it does.
It's like, I get having like a vacation house or a vacation home somewhere else, but just a house to go to on the weekend that you're not just making your regular residence, especially in, LA beach area. Come on, man.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, seriously, why aren't you just like hanging out there all the damn time? But I guess, newspaper moguls, they do whatever the hell they want.
Pretty much.
Now, the reason Lenore is at Mr. Brimmer's home is she wants to throw in his face his offer, because she feels, this is something he has done to other people. Probably, she has no proof of it, but it's a fair assumption on her part, and she's not having it. She's very much being a woman of the time, a strong woman in general, just saying, no, you're not going to force me into a situation that I'm not going to be in control of. I'm going to control the situation, even if it is going to be bad for me, because screw you.
Yeah, essentially saying, like, either he's going to divorce me or we're going to make up. But ultimately, you're going to look like a fool for lying to him. And
Yeah.
I'm going to explain your business practices to my husband, and you're going to pay. And this is where we start to see the angry side of Brimmer.
Yes, because he detains her and tries to make her not leave, because she's trying to get out of the place, and he's trying to salvage the situation so that it does not end up blowing up in his and his company's face. And this, Anthony, is the first accidental murder in the Columbo series, and is the only purely accidental murder that is not followed by a second premeditated murder.
Yes.
That's usually what the trend is in Columbo, is that if there is an accidental murder, there will be most likely a second premeditated one as a result of the cover-up of the first.
Now, this is where I want to talk about the good use of directing here. This is what reminded me of the Spielberg that we saw last week in the murder scene, where it's the close-up, the POV shot, point of view, if you will, and the slow motion usage of just seeing how angry. And again, this is just a testament, John, a testament to Robert Culp and his acting skills, and just physically seeing the anger in this man's face as he strikes her with a backhand. And I loved the scene. She got struck and she was falling down, and it's all from an upward shot, very Spielberg-esque, of Brimmer looking down, and there's glass flying up towards him, indicating that she was struck and fell on a glass table and shattered it.
Yeah, so there's 2 points of impact: the backhand by Brimmer, and a forceful head injury to some kind of table that ultimately is what killed Lenore Kennicott.
And not only that, we see this beautiful shot, like I mentioned, of the glass falling up, and then you just see Brimmer standing there looking at his actions. Again, didn't mean to murder her. He meant to strike her, obviously. But then from this shot, it stays on his face, John, and then you see what happens next via the lenses of his glasses.
Yeah, they superimpose the what would be in other episodes, the montage of the murderer covering up the scene and moving the body. It's all superimposed onto the lenses of Investigator Brimmer's glasses. Now, while I think we're both in agreement, Anthony, that the sequence right before the glasses montage is great. I really like that sequence with the glass and the slow motion. It really helps sell the moment and the impact of it all. I'm not a big fan of the superimposing on the glasses. It feels very much dated to my eyes.
Now, that's a fair point, John, but I actually enjoy it, and let me give you my reasoning behind it. Yes,
Please.
it's a product of its time, being the 70s, and you see a lot of that. But for someone, let's say, who is seeing this for the first time, that is a definite creative choice of doing it this way, seeing it imposed on his glasses, rather than going for a 10-minute scene where he's cleaning up the body and rolling up a body and washing his hands. In this case, there's no car to ditch because she walked from the beach home to his home.
Yes.
But again, it's a nice way to tighten it all up and tidy it all up with not doing your just generic, okay, ditch a body, throw a body. It was very creative, and honestly was one of my, going back to last week with Spielberg and how that body was thrown in a trunk, and how we talked about, and I spoke of how it was just kind of a jump cut real quick. This was the complete opposite, and I felt that this was an excellent use of choice by the director.
I see your point. I think we can move on from that. So I think we could talk about the music because post the glasses montage, we go to Brimmer getting his car, which now has Lenore's body, and leaving. And it's a very jazzy, upbeat score.
Yeah, we're going from, in my opinion, a scene where you have great use of music, great use of score, great use of actors and directing and shots, to this scene where completely darkened, it's completely sinister, but we have this weird upbeat jazz music in the background as he's driving this body to dispose of it. And John, it just didn't fit the tone.
No, not even in the slightest. It's a very poor choice. I get maybe the intention was that, you know, it's meant to be that he's, you know, Brimmer's in an agitated position and it's meant to help, you know, move the speed of the scene. But I don't know. It just doesn't. I don't know if that necessarily works, and it just creates it. And it creates awkwardness in it, you know?
And I think you bring up awkwardness, which is a great pivot for me to talk about this. I think they threw the music in there to make the viewer less awkward as just waiting for this transition to the next scene. But I think there was an opportunity missed, and I'm going to tie in another movie from the 70s that had an excellent usage of this. I think this scene should have been a silent. No music in the background, just the sinister drive, a la, you know, Bullet from the 1970s, where they have that race.
And you just hear the engines.
And all you hear is the engines and squealing of the tires. I think this scene would have been a lot more sinister, would have hit a lot more home if this was just a silent drive. And again, it doesn't have to be a super lengthy 10-minute drive, mind you, but just this sinister drive of just seeing this darkened thing, maybe some headlights coming from other vehicles being imposed on his glasses, and just, again, because Robert Culp here, being just that pro that he is, I think that his usage of facial expressions and nonverbal cues, given the silence in the background, I think could have really taken his cynicism and really accented it to the point where it would have really sold the moment better.
That is a very, very strong argument. I really agree with it, Anthony. Now, we go to the dumping of Lenore's body, and he literally goes to a construction yard. So I for a minute I thought it was like an actual auto dump, and it turns out not to be the case.
And what was funny, and this is just a little personal anecdote while watching this, I confused this dumping scene to another future Columbo episode dumping scene where a body's disposed, and it might have actually been a Robert Culp one as well, where a body's disposed and there is a homeless man outside. So I'm looking for this homeless man in this junkyard. And again, I was super confused and I was a little scatterbrained for a minute. So I was like, okay, this must have been a different episode. And I'm remembering this particular episode a lot different.
Yeah. But what's notable to me about this scene, and it's something that comes up later, apparently there's no tire tracks.
Yeah.
But he dumps Lenore's body. He makes it look like it was a mugging, and then just drives off. And I think, this is about almost 16 minutes in, Anthony, and I think we can welcome in a certain somebody by the name of Lieutenant Columbo as we go into Act 2. Act 2, Anthony, it starts about 16 minutes in with Columbo having a very leisurely drive in Los Angeles with a great, great theme.
Excellent theme. Excellent shot of just a smiling Columbo. Doesn't have a care in the world, which I don't see how that is being a job where you just have to investigate the worst of the worst in people.
Considering he's on his way to a murder scene.
Yeah, and it's just affable and just kind of like la-di-da-di-da until a motorcycle policeman pulls aside of him with his sirens on, indicating for Columbo to pull over.
And this motorcycle cop tells him, his taillight's out and says, you're going to get it fixed now. And Columbo reveals, oh, I'm a detective. I'm on my way to a crime scene. And the bike cop literally has his tone change in a flash. And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, Lieutenant.
Not only that, John, but he's also, Columbo indicates that this was like the second or third time he got pulled over just in this drive alone.
I know.
From his taillight, essentially. And while the police officer changes his tone with Columbo, he's also like, hey, this license also expires like in 3 days. You need to get that checked too. And Columbo's like, yeah, I'll get into it, which is actually a pretty good point that sets up a crucial moment
Later on,
later
yes.
on.
Which is honestly one of the best bits of comedy in the
Yes.
episode too.
Absolutely.
And the other one happens in this scene where the bike cop says, I'm going to give you an escort so you can get to the crime scene faster. And Columbo's like, okay, but just remember, not too fast.
I don't think his poor car could even make it like 65.
Probably not. So we get to the crime scene, and it's a pretty busy crime scene. We have a bunch of uniformed officers and some suited detectives and the medical examiner.
Police captain out there too, which I found interesting.
This horse-faced jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a jerk.
He was definitely a jerk.
He's a
He's
jerk. I
going
don't
in
like him.
with the little butt things, and he's like, Columbo, are you paying attention? Columbo's like, yeah. And just Columbo the entire time is looking for a lighter to light his cigar, which is a nice, fun Columbo moment of affability where he's just like, hey, do you have a lighter? No. Hey, do you have a lighter? No. And he's literally going to everybody in the crime scene.
But you got a match. You got a match.
Yeah.
And then Columbo examines the body, sees the bruise on the cheek, and they mention that there's no prints, there's no tire tracks, which I don't understand how there is no tire tracks. I get no prints because that's not where she was it's not the murder scene, but it's just the lack of like full investigation on that scene bugged me a little bit. Like, how did it feel to you?
I understand what you're saying about that, but again, with the knowledge coming in the future that the murderer Burner is a former police officer, I think he said he was on the homicide squad or something of that nature. It just, I guess, is trying to speak to how well he can cover up a crime.
Possibly.
Again, this is all just out of smoke at this point because we're not truly given a reason. But yeah, I did find it odd there was no tire tracks, which only just led me to believe that, again, okay, he's really good at literally covering his tracks.
And from this track, we go to the next track, music joke. Yeah, I guess bad music joke. We cut to the hospital where Mr. Kennicott has to identify his wife's body, and that leads to a conversation between Columbo and Mr. Kennicott about Lenore and about, does she have any enemies? No, she was beloved by all, which is interesting in that I feel like this old man is very much enamored with the idea of who his wife was and not necessarily aware of her as a person.
I think it's that. What I also appreciate about this scene is that he obviously knows Columbo's going to ask him because it's statistically shown that when there's a domestic violence incident like this, especially resulting in death, that it's typically the partner that is the one who did the murder or did the assault. So he knows this of Columbo. So he's already offering like, hey, look, check with my secretary. She'll show you my flight plan. She'll do all of this. And then what I found interesting is that, again, to pull his own weight, he tells Columbo, and when you're done running all of that, which I know you have to do, actually get on this. And I want this done quickly, and I don't want this done efficiently, and I want results.
Yeah, and he has a significant amount of weight to all that, I feel. It helps that, it's an older Ray Milland who can convincingly play a very intelligent, very experienced newspaper man.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I believed 100% that he owned a huge monopoly on, a newspaper industry spanning from West Coast and East Coast.
Yeah. And a thing I appreciated in this scene, before the scene ends, they hold a beat on Milland, after he thanks Columbo for the coffee, and you can just kind of see the weight of everything just hit on him.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, again, it's showing that he was putting on this brave front and saying, I want results, I want this done quick, but then he also let his vulnerability show, like after Columbo left, and he just finally, again, got hit with the weight of the severity that his wife that he loved is gone.
Yeah, it's very, very subtle, very strong acting from Milland, and I really greatly appreciated that. So I believe we transition then to the next day at Kennicott's mansion.
And boy, is it ever a mansion.
Yeah, it used in The Godfather, from what I understand.
Oh,
according to the Columbo file, they said that set was used for, I believe, the first Godfather and one other movie.
I can see that.
But Columbo is giving him an update, and he essentially he has no leads. He's got nothing. They said the theory is that they knew that she was at the beach house, according to the housekeeper. They just can't figure out where the crime scene really was because it's not at the beach house. It's certainly not the construction site, and they can't figure out the bruise. So they're saying mugging, but it's not matching. But Columbo has nothing really to point, and no one specific to point to because there's nothing there. The question is, how did she go from one side of LA to the other side of LA? It doesn't add up. Then we go from an exterior set to a very obvious interior set,
Yes.
which it makes me miss Spielberg again because it's just I wish it was more of a real building than a set, but I get it. And we're introduced, or Columbo rather is introduced. We are reintroduced to Mr. Bremer, who offered his assistance.
Yep, I was just
In this
about
case.
to say that. He apparently called at Mr. Kennington and said, "Hey, my goodness gracious, let me help you out with this. You'll have the full force of my investigative squad at your leisure."
And Columbo asks him, it's just like, oh, so you did business with him for his newspaper? No, just it was personal, which was probably a little bit of a clue, but I don't think Columbo suspects anything quite yet. And we'll talk about that as the scene goes on.
Possibly.
Do you want to talk about it now?
Yeah, let's talk about it now.
Let's talk about it now.
I think he does suspect him at this point. Again, offering his services and then mentioning that he had a personal matter that he helped Mr. Kennington. And again, obviously Columbo's eyeing him up, measuring him out, and sees that he has this fantastic ring on his finger, to which Columbo then, in classic Columbo style, starts to say and start to talk about how he is into palm reading.
Wait, you're skipping over, I think, the best line in this episode, where Columbo, once Bremer starts talking about all this stuff, he gets this smile on his face and he just says, "I suddenly feel much more optimistic about this whole thing."
Yeah.
And then goes into all of this spiel about, palm reading and astrology, reads Kennicott's hand, reads Bremer's palm, which is just an excuse to figure out if he has a ring.
Yeah, at which he does, which Columbo doesn't mention about the ring now. But what I loved about it is Columbo sitting there like, and you can tell he's just making it up by the seat of his pants, right? He's talking about, "Oh, Mr. Kennicott, you have this long lifeline here," and then it comes back around, and all. And then mentioning with Bremer, I was like, "What do you call it?" He said the thumb of Venus is high, so that means you're a strong and boastful man or something like that. I was laughing myself off.
And this is something that's going to get supported later. I feel like in this episode, Columbo is very much a cat playing with its food.
Yeah.
It's like the moment he sees Bremer there and learns, oh, Bremer was something of a personal matter, now trying to be brought in on another personal matter. Something doesn't add up there. And that makes him more suspicious in Columbo's mind. Now, Columbo, in trying to leave, opens up a closet, which is a great little bit, and finds Lenore's golf clubs, which we learn is her new hobby, but she didn't take golfing lessons at the club where she actually golfed. She went to a whole nother golf club or country club to get golfing lessons, but then golfed at another club. So
isn't that just convenient?
That's fascinating, isn't it? Ain't that something?
Peter Falk, everybody.
Yeah, Peter Falk. I just channel him. He's a very warm blanket. So Columbo leaves the manor and notices Mr. Bremer's car and notices, he's paying attention to the chrome for some reason. We find out later, he's just looking. He notices that it's, because of the salt air by the beach. So that means something to Columbo because he knows, there's a beach house that the Kennicotts own. So now it's just like, I wonder what Mr. Bremer has to hide more about beach houses. But he doesn't go straight after Mr. Bremer, Anthony. Where does he go?
He goes to the golf course that he just brought up and meets this high, fancy, good-looking, by 1970 standards, man who is a golf instructor who is instructing a very young woman. And the young woman's asking, "Oh, can we get an extra lesson in?" He goes, "No, sorry. Can't do that."
And did you catch his line to her? Just stroke it easy.
Yes. Oh yeah.
That's just like they're leaning very heavily on the fact that this golfing instructor might do more with his balls than golf with them.
He's sinking more than one hole in one, if you know what I mean.
Hi-oh! Ed McMahon, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, Charlie. Oh, Columbo.
I want to reenact what we just did with me as Johnny and you as Ed.
Oh, my God. Go for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this here is Johnny Carson, and I was watching an episode of Columbo last night. Did you watch Columbo? Oh, that's good.
Charlie, I love Columbo.
That's good to know, Ed. Now there was a golf instructor on that episode there, Ed. And you want to know what he was doing? He had a lot of female clientele, tending to sink more than one hole, if you know what I mean.
Oh, Charlie. Oh, Charlie, you're a son of a gun.
We have a great show here for you, ladies and gentlemen.
And back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon, ladies and gentlemen. Just
Give him an
left.
applause.
Just left.
Went for a cigar. Now, Columbo comes across this golfing instructor. I believe his name is Ken, right?
I didn't.
Something like that. I didn't catch it.
Just some generic pretty boy name.
Yeah. So, and Columbo's fumbling through the instructor's calendar, which he can't really do without a warrant, I don't think.
No, he technically he can't, but of course it's Columbo, and he's just kind of meandering in there.
Yeah, and he's meandering in this golf shop, and he's doing this whole like conversation with this golf instructor, and he's being very sly, and he implies to the instructor, it's just like, I know what you're doing. You had a lot of appointments with Mrs. Kennicott, first in the mornings, and then it was later in the afternoon, right before closing time. So, you might want to maybe get a lawyer before you tell me anything more.
Yeah, it doesn't say it exactly like that, but the way he says it was so amazing, John. It's essentially he's letting this golf instructor know, like, I know what you're doing. I know that you're having an affair with her. But before he gets any confirmation or anything, he says, and he puts his hand out and says, I want you to just wait until you get yourself a lawyer before we go into the first conversation. And then hits a golf ball onto the range, and this awful stop cut of a golf ball flying into the range. And
Columbo's like golf swing was like so like jerky.
Oh
like,
my God!
There's no way he would have hit that ball
perfectly to the green. Landed perfectly, mind you.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much would you call it like a James Bond scene? Because Columbo feels a little bit smoother.
Yeah,
than it does in most other situations.
I think it is, but this is kind of a common theme that runs throughout the show, John. And what I mean by that is, to the person he suspects is the main murderer, he is affable, he's goofy, he seems like he doesn't know what he's doing, seems over his head, if you will. But with people like these side characters, the people he just needs information out, he is a lot smoother and he's a lot more cunning.
I agree. And this golf scene is a prime example of that. Now, we move to Brimmer and Associates again. And Brimmer is giving his theory to his associates, saying that she was taking a walk on the highway and she was forced into a car to be mugged, and then the mugging turned violent and she was killed, and then the mugger just drove around in panic and then eventually dumped her in the construction site where she was found.
Which there's so many holes in this logic that he gives out.
It's so forced. It's like so
forced.
It's so clear. Like for us as the viewer, it's just it's patently obvious. Oh, he's saying all of this so that his ass is covered. But and none of his associates are going to poke at it because it's their boss and he's supposed to be an expert.
Yeah, because as soon as he's describing this scene, I'm sitting there like, why would this wife of a multimillionaire, possibly billionaire, be possibly walking to, on a highway of all things in order to do whatever it may be, right? It just doesn't make any sense, John.
No, I agree. And so Columbo comes up, and this is another scene that I really like because towards the end of it, right before Columbo shows up, we're behind this map that Brimmer has in a secret hideaway closet, and it's a I guess it's like a piece of glass that they're pretending is just this map, at least for the camera's sake, because we're behind that map, and then the cabinet that Brimmer has this map in closes, and it's a nice little scene transition. It's a nice implied fade to black, and then it goes to the next part of the scene, which I really enjoyed. From that, Columbo shows up and is there to bring the current police report to Brimmer because they're technically working together, because that's what Kennicott wants. And Columbo is really bothered. It's bothering me. Just these little things, they bother me. He's bothered by the cut on Lenore's cheek, and he knows that it's caused by a ring. And he goes into this logic explanation of how a man would likely hit a woman. They wouldn't hit with a closed fist. It would likely be an open hand. So what likely happened here is that a man backhanded with his ring hand Lenore. Based on the position of the strike, it was probably with the man's left hand that did the strike, and it was unpremeditated. It was spur of the moment, heat of passion. And Columbo also theorizes whomever this murderer is, when we find him, he's going to have a bad temper. And Columbo does a lot of like sly tricks in this episode that I really appreciate. I mean, the first was the palm reading trick, and then he asks for Brimmer to write a receipt so that he can have something to show, oh, I delivered this report to him. And that's a way to figure out if Brimmer is left-handed.
Which he does, because Brimmer is like, oh, sure, I'll write out this receipt to you, grabs it, starts writing with his left hand, and that's when Columbo goes, gee, what a coincidence. We're talking about a left-handed killer, and you're left-handed. And Brimmer's defense is he takes the pen from his left hand to his right hand and says, oh, yeah, I'm ambidextrous. Only 10% of the population is this way.
Which is an incorrect statistic from what I learned. It's like 1%, apparently. So maybe it was that way back then, but I don't know.
But again, it was still such a cop out. Like, dude,
yeah,
like you're not ambidextrous. Stop it.
Yeah, it's like you're just making up shit. And maybe he is ambidextrous, but it's something that I think you can also train yourself to do somewhat too. And Columbo also mentions the tarnish on the chrome of Brimmer's car here. So
but he does it in a very clever way, John.
Yes. Please, Anthony, describe it.
He goes, hey, so my sister-in-law is looking at a house by the beach, and I know you live by the beach, so how is it? And Brimmer goes, well, how do you know I live there? I didn't give you that. And Columbo's like, oh, just from the appealing chrome that I saw from your car, I figured the only way that could happen is, salt water. Water by the, because the beach water is made of salt water because it's from the ocean, and that's what corroded your car chrome. Yeah.
It's a brilliant little tag by Columbo. Just, again, cat playing with his food. It's just like, I know it's you. I'm going to get you when I'm ready for you, but I'm just going to play with you in the meantime.
Yep. And from there, John, Columbo goes back to the golf range.
Back to another James Bond moment, if you ask me.
Absolutely. And it's dark this time. You can tell it's like the end of the workday. And we see the golf pro, Ken, or whatever his name was. He's packing up. He's looking ready to just flee the country. He's looking to just get the heck out of Dodge. And Columbo is sitting and waiting for this golf instructor in the golf instructor's car.
Which is a chilling-ass moment as far as I'm concerned. Even though Columbo is very much lovable, it's just like, oh, that's the scary.
Yeah, and he's just very scary, smoking his cigar, and the golf instructor goes into the car, doesn't scream or anything, which to the credit of this man, because I would have just yelled like a little girl if I would have just walked in my car and saw Columbo, this darkened figure, smoking a cigar, staring at me.
What's even scarier, though, is what happens when Columbo and the golf instructor leave the car, and we notice they're being followed.
Yep.
And what's scary is that observer looks directly at the camera.
Yeah, that was spooky.
That was spooky stuff, and that's one of the couple of shots that I really do appreciate, because it really helps sell the menace of that scene is already there, because Columbo is just chilling out like Darkseid in this dude's car, and then we move to this complete stranger who's just staring at them and staring at us too.
Yep. So Columbo takes the golf instructor to a walk, and they have a talk. And the golf instructor is sitting there like, look, I know how this looks. I was running away because I you know about the affair. I was running because you're going to assume I killed her, and I didn't do it. And Columbo just goes back to him and says, no, I know you didn't kill her because of tan lines, and he's not wearing a ring.
Yeah, and there's no way a golf instructor that heavily tanned could stop wearing a ring and it not be noticeable. So he doesn't wear a ring. And even though there is no solid alibi, there's not enough evidence to support a presumption that this golf instructor murdered Lenore because she wanted the affair to end.
And then, John, we have, again, talking about weird editing, a weird just jump cut.
Before we go to that jump cut, though, one last thing that the golf instructor mentions, and did you mention that he said that they were being followed?
Oh, I did not mention that. Yes, we talked about him being followed, but
yeah, that is something that the golf instructor mentioned, that a couple of times when he was with Lenore, that he had this sneaking suspicion he was being followed by some big guy with a crew cut. And then we do a very abrupt cut to Columbo
back at Brimmer's business getting a VIP tour of the facility.
Not to mention the computer room, Anthony.
Oh my gosh. Giant,
wow.
Folks. We are talking about giant towers. You know what remind me of, John? I think it was Captain America 3 Winter Soldier.
2.
Two, excuse me. Captain America 2, where they go into the base and it's nothing but these giant computer towers in a room.
Yeah, and it turns out to be the brain of a Nazi scientist.
Yes, that's exactly what it reminded me of.
I agree. I mean, that's something for reference to our younger viewers who don't really know that computers have gotten perpetually smaller throughout the years. So they've gone from being taking up entire buildings to entire floors to an entire room to now being able to fit inside your pocket.
I was waiting for them to say like a gigabyte of memory or talk about whatever the memory.
Or a megabyte.
Yeah, talking about the memory capability of whatever this is, just so I could have that nice laugh. But it was never mentioned, so.
No, I think at that time, that's still not something that was very commonly spoken about. Now, we also, we come to a scene where it honestly kind of reflects Columbo's character. This associate that is giving Columbo the tour tells Columbo, walk past this gate and something will happen. And nothing happens. And it turns out it's a metal detector. And the associate asks, "Are you carrying your gun?" And Columbo goes, "Well, no." Which I love about Columbo. He doesn't carry the gun. He doesn't want to resolve through violence. It's always, the evidence is going to tell me, they're going to tell me. I'm not going to force the issue through violence.
I'm not going to beat it out of them. I'm not going to intimidate them by it. I'm going to use my own cleverness against their not so cleverness to get what I need to get to convict whomever of murdering a life, essentially. And so exactly. At this point, Columbo meets up with Brimmer, but before he goes into the room and talks to Brimmer starts yelling at his associate that was showing Columbo the tour, because the associate let it slip that they're working on some sort of surveillance. And
well, it was.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was. He was telling Columbo about how you can't really underestimate people when it comes to guns, because even the slightest person could have it. And he starts going into detail about one of their clients and describing who this client was. And that's where Brimmer comes in, hearing all this, and then blows his cork.
Oh, just lays into him. Good Lord. Talk about an HR violation, John.
Yeah, and this associate, a guy named Denning, he is a kicked puppy. And he looks like a puppy that has repeatedly been horribly abused. Yeah,
tail. You can just his shoulders slump, tail between the legs. You can tell.
The light in his eyes dies a little.
Yeah, exactly. It was uncomfortable. But again, a credit to just the acting job of Robert Culp in this, John, and just how he can sell just this blow up maniac at any moment. It's just fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic. It's a great moment from Robert Culp. Even though there is a moment where they dub in a new read of another line, it's still a really strong scene to help nail in. This is a very aggressive man, and Robert Culp sells every second of it.
Yes, 100%.
Now, Columbo is welcomed into Brimmer's office for a very, very fancy fish dinner.
Yeah, super extravagant. We're talking, it's like a buffet course of all of this different kinds of fish of the sea. It was
Champagne.
Oh yeah,
It's the whole 9 yards. And we realize that Brimmer is doing this because he wants to hire Columbo for Brimmer and Associates.
And again, what he says is that I can almost triple your yearly income, Columbo,
I know.
which is crazy to think about. And again, Columbo's kind of off-put by this. He's off-put, but he knows that it's because he's getting too close.
Like he even asks, like, would I be able to stay on the Kennicott case? And Brimmer's just like, no, it's not as important. There are other bigger things that I would put you on immediately. More worthy of your time. This isn't worthy of your time.
So Columbo says he'd think about it.
And this is also after Columbo reveals that he discovered that Mrs. Kennicott was having an affair. And I love that there's a moment where Brimmer has this look of, it's an oh crap moment.
Yeah.
On his face. It's just like, oh no, he's figured it out. Yeah. And Robert Culp really sells that oh no moment very, very well.
And so I wanted to talk about a little bit, but this has to do with a scene that takes place right after with Columbo talking about poor Dennis.
But there's a couple of things within this dinner, this little lunch that I wanted to talk about, because Brimmer talking about the salary stuff again. He's starting to say, it's like if I had stayed on the force, I would have been a captain with an eye on advancement and another eye on my car payments. No room to travel. No power. And it seemed like in Brimmer's mind, power is accomplishment to him. There's simpatico. And if you don't have, sufficient power to live the way you want to live, you're not accomplished, which I find to be a load of crap.
Yeah. There's something to that line of thinking. And that's a line of thinking that's a lot of people share, especially people of the higher echelon in today's society. So there is something to that. However, yes, to the everyday person, that's a load of crap.
Yeah. Now, before we move on, Anthony, did you see Columbo drink the champagne at all? Because I don't know if he did.
I don't remember him touching the champagne.
I don't think he did. And I think that's more support for him being a cat playing with his food, where it's just like, I'm going to stay on my game.
Yeah. And that was him also just non-discreetly showing like, no, I'm still in the case, man.
Yeah. And nothing, no carrot you can dangle in front of me is going to be enough. So we cut to the conversation with Denning, because Columbo comes back to talk to Denning and apologize for the whole blow up, and learns, oh no, Brimmer has done this before and it won't be the last time. And he tells him, oh, he offered me a job. And the conversation leads to, who the top dog is at Brimmer and Associates. And Denning mentions this guy named Leo, who gets, the prime cut of the cases. And Columbo, in another brilliant move, just like, I think I know him, tall guy, crew cut. And Denning goes, yeah, which is just a brilliant way to corroborate what was told to Columbo by the golf instructor.
Now, John, I have a fun fact about this conversation for you.
Yes,
I think you'd enjoy. So, when Denning is telling Columbo to ask for the top dollar, he says something along the lines of that it's $30,000 a year.
That's unreal.
Yeah. And that's in 1971 dollars. So what I did is I went ahead and converted that via inflation to today's money. And that $31,000 in 1971 dollars would equate to about approximately $191,000 a year. So almost $200,000.
Are you kidding me?
I am not, sir.
Oh my God. Jesus, Lord have mercy.
Yeah. So because I heard that and I was like, well, 30,000 sounds like nothing compared to today, but this is 1971 or so.
Yeah, so let's account for inflation.
And again, it's over $191,000, but essentially I rounded down to $191,000.
That is unreal.
But needless to say, I would have let this guy get away with murder. But that is why I am not as pure as Columbo.
No, I think we're both in agreement there. So from his conversation with Denning, he's able to track down Leo and his family. And we see Leo, I believe, a little earlier on in the episode. And it turns out that Brimmer has taken Leo out of the picture. Only by that, I mean, he just put him on assignment somewhere where Columbo can't get him.
Yeah, but he did bring his passport, apparently.
So apparently he's overseas somewhere where Columbo wouldn't have jurisdiction and would not be able to track him down because Leo's wife doesn't know because they don't talk about work, which, fair. It's a confidentiality
a
issue.
Very common thing, and I thought it's a very healthy way to keep the relationship going strong.
Yeah, keep work and your personal life separate. So at this point, we think Columbo is out of ideas. He can't track down Leo. He has a strong suspicion that Brimmer is the guy, but he can't necessarily pin it. And we cut to the DMV, which doesn't seem like it's changed in about forever.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Columbo is just standing in line at the DMV to get his license renewed. And there's this lady in glasses taking an eye exam.
And Columbo's thinking, like, let me paint the picture. He's sitting there in line. He's rubbing his brow, rubbing his chin, trying to figure out how he can pin it and how to get the evidence needed to convict Brimmer of the murder. Because at this point, he's pretty much dead giveaway that he is the one who did the murder. Hence where now we're overhearing this conversation between the DMV teller and the customer in line that's in front of Columbo doing an eye exam.
And that she had a new prescription. And Columbo goes up to the teller, to the DMV employee, and hands over the stuff. And he has this realization, that's it. That no prescription. They were there the whole time. He says something along those lines.
And he bangs the counter of the DMV and tells the teller. And he's like, she wasn't wearing her glasses.
Yes.
The poor DMV teller's like, yeah, she was.
Which is another little subtle comedy bit, which later as post the 80s shows, when we go into those TV movies of the late 80s, 90s, up to the end of the show, where they focus a little bit more on comedy. Yeah, I appreciate that the comedy in the earlier episodes was a lot more subtle and a lot more just like, just stuff like this. It's like, yeah, she was wearing her glasses. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
From a DMV guy who talked to a woman with glasses.
And all of this joke was set up by the very first scene we see Columbo in, and that cop saying, hey, your license expires in 3 days, Columbo. You need to get this checked out.
So Columbo goes back to the Kennicott mansion and it explains to Mr. Kennicott, she's wearing her glasses. Where are her glasses? Her glasses were not on her body. And Mr. Kennicott reveals, she went to contacts. She was very conscious about her look. So she wanted to not have to deal with the glasses anymore. So Columbo presents this theory to Mr. Kennicott, and says, it's a long shot, but I think we might have something, but it's going to be painful. Are you comfortable doing this? And we'll find out what exactly that is in our discussion of Act 3. All right, Anthony, we are in the final run of this episode, Act 3. We learn what Columbo wants Mr. Kennicott to authorize, and it is the exhumation of his wife's body to determine if the contact lenses were knocked out by the blow to her face.
Yes. And so we have this shot of another jump cut into the graveyard in which said exhumation's taking place, and one of Brimmer's one of his associates calls him saying, hey, they're here at the graveyard. I don't know much of what's going on, but I do know that Mr. Kennicott signed an exhumation for his wife.
Yes, so that prompts Brimmer to try to jet over there. His personal car won't start for whatever reason. We'll get back to that later.
Very odd. Turns won't just turn over.
Yeah, I know. It's just like you just hear it going, but it just won't turn over. So he takes one of his the company cars and heads over, finds Kennicott in his limo or Rolls or whatever. Just watching the police exhume the body. It's not like a full take out of the ground. It seems like she was buried in a mausoleum, so it's easier access. So Columbo consults with the medical examiner that we met earlier in the episode. We find out that a contact lens is missing. So it's like if wherever that lens is likely the crime scene, because it was likely knocked out when it got when Lenore got struck. And Columbo goes into an anecdote about how his nephew, went to contacts and the darn things are always falling out. Would you call this reverse psychology on Brimmer? Just, saying, wherever we find this lens, it's going to be our crime scene.
Yeah, he's definitely starting to really hone in on Brenner and really try to lengthen the rope to which Brimmer's going to hang himself with, essentially.
So post that conversation at the gravesite, we moved back to Mr. Brimmer's beach house and him on his hands and knees searching that lovely shag carpet.
That 1970s just bright green shag carpet.
Was it orange? Was it orange green? I don't know which.
No, it was green. I looked and I was like, that is one green ass shag carpet.
It is a super 70s carpet. Good listeners. So he is searching, and then Columbo shows up at his beach house to say, it's just, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been thinking about it. I'm just happy where I am. I don't want to rock the boat. I'm going to have to turn down your offer. And, isn't this a nice carpet? My wife and I were looking into one of these. We're just looking for something like this. And he also says, do you recall what Columbo said his reasoning for turning down the job offer?
One of the main driving forces, because he says he wants to close this case because he doesn't want any loose ends. He wants to see it through, essentially. I don't remember his exact wordage on that, but...
Yeah, and I believe Brimmer says, you'll let me know if you find anything. And Columbo has this great line. It's like, don't worry, you'll be the first to know. Which, again, it's, I love it. As much as I love Columbo, doing these love jabs with people just by being disarming. I just love the fact that he's being somewhat indirectly direct and just leaning into the whole cat playing with his food bit. It's so entertaining to me.
And speaking of things that are entertaining, John.
Yes.
Brimmer entertains the notion that since it's not in his shag rug, a contact lens must be in the car that he transported the dead body of Mrs. Kennicott in.
Yes, because when he tried to go to the cemetery, he told his car manager for Brimmer and Associates, get my car serviced. I want it as soon as possible. So, and he calls to confirm that. So he goes to the auto shop that his car is being serviced in, picks the lock to the shop, breaks into it so he can go to his car to search the trunk. He searches his trunk, and finds the lens. And if I can't say this about the score here again, Mr. Malay's score honestly is at its best here.
Yes. In this scene, I will say, all the notes actually hit for me.
It's a great tension buildup where Brimmer's just combing the trunk of this car, trying to find this lens. You don't know if he's going to get away with it, and you think he might get away with it if he finds this stuff because nobody knows where he is. There's no reason to suspect him. Honestly, it's any connection is tenuous at best, to be quite honest. So he finds the lens, closes the trunk, and then we get the big reveal of a number of LAPD officers just lounging in the cars, just around in this shop, and how Brimmer did not notice them, even though he had a flashlight and was looking at cars to figure out where his was. that's beyond me. But I mean,
But yeah, the lights get turned on in a classic gotcha moment. LAPD's finest is walking down with Columbo, and oddly enough, Mr. Kinnicott, is also there, which I found a little odd, John. I feel like that, typically speaking, Columbo wouldn't have brought the victim's husband to the scene of a confession.
Yeah, I mean, you run the risk of the husband getting emotionally enraged, and it's trying to do something that they'll come to regret. So it's a little suspect, but considering Kennicott's status as a big newspaper man and having big standing in the area and being able to throw his mogul weight around, I think it's not surprising. Plus, I think throughout this episode when he and Columbo interact, there is a very cordial friendship between the two of them.
Like an understanding, essentially.
Yeah, and I think Columbo respects Kennicott enough to say, okay, I'm not going to cut you out of this because you are asking to know. You have demonstrated to me that you can handle this, so I will keep you involved. And I trust that it's not going to get blown out of proportion because you know better.
But what does get blown out of proportion, John, is Brimmer's attitude when asked, why were you searching through the trunk?
Oh, yeah. This is where it's another instance like we got in Murder by the Book where the disdain towards the lieutenant is very obvious now. Brimmer is barely containing rage. He's just like wondering, why are you here? What does this matter? What does your presence matter? What does my presence matter? I needed papers. I needed something to do something important. You can't get in the way of that.
Files for his case that it's an emergency, and he's spitting these words like venom at Columbo, literally gritting his teeth, barely getting the words out because at any point it seems like he's going to blow his top and like beat up Columbo.
It's a great scene from Robert Culp, and another instance where he is so great at conveying a man on the edge of rage and keeping himself contained because he knows if he lets it go, it's going to be bad for him.
Exactly.
Even though he gets the immediate satisfaction of what he wants, it's going to end up backfiring against him. Because he's honestly, this is where he loses control, And you can make the argument that he never had control to begin with because he had put himself in such a precarious situation by A, lying to Kennicott about his wife's affair, and B, then using that non-disclosure to get Lenore to do something that he wanted.
Yeah.
Which is, incredibly reckless for somebody who's supposed to be, experienced former policeman and an experienced private investigator.
Yeah. And so Brimmer agrees to go with Columbo downtown to talk through these things.
Because he effectively confesses and says it was just an accident. I didn't know her. I didn't mean to do any of this.
Not yet. I was talking about before that Brimmer was going to go with them. And then I think, was it that he attempts to throw the lens in the trash and Columbo catches him doing that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I jumped the gun. So they agreed to go downtown to discuss. And he pulls out a cigarette, and I think he had slipped the contact lens into his pocket, and then in that same pocket tried to slip it in. When he was in the motion of drawing the cigarette out of the thing of cigarettes. I don't know what it's called. You can tell I don't smoke.
Carton, something like that.
Cartons are the bigger things.
Yeah, the case, I guess, cigarette case.
I for lack of a better description. So I think Brimmer was trying to slyly put the contact lens into his cigarette case, or put it in a position where it can get lit on fire by the lighting of the cigarette. And then Columbo says, "Stop it!" Grab his arm, and then they find the lens that Brimmer found in the trunk of his car.
And amongst seeing this and putting it up to the light, finding this contact lens, that's when Brimmer starts to go full confession, looks at Mr. Kennicott and says, hey, this was an accident. It was not premeditated. I didn't mean to kill her.
Yeah. At that point, he gets taken away, and then Columbo and Kennicott have a very interesting conversation, where Columbo reveals there was no missing lens. The medical examiner found both lenses in her eyes. They were never removed, or they never fell out. Turns out this lens was a plant. Which is
that aspect of it, I was going to save for my final thought, and that concept behind it. Because right here in this moment, it's kind of glossed over, and then Columbo glosses it over by explaining how it was that car was in the shop, John. And essentially, he glosses it over and says, when I was a kid, this shop reminds me of when me and the boys back in our neighborhood, which was a rough neighborhood, we did some really naughty things that boys do, and we, just to stop a car from not working, not harm it, we would put a potato in the tailpipe. And it's just so funny that it seemed like that's what happened to this car here.
And then he says this line. It's like, I think the reason I became a cop was to make up for all those terrible jokes I played as a kid.
And what I do appreciate is Columbo essentially walks out. Mr. Kennicott goes, and it looks like he's going to look in the tailpipe, thinks better of it, and just walks away.
I think it's a good moment of trust between those two men, and that he gave Columbo the benefit of the doubt, I suppose. But and we can. Do you want to save it for your final thoughts on the ethics of all of this? But
I do. Yeah, I want to save that for my final thought, because that's one of my bigger points.
So the episode closes with Kennicott and Columbo walking out, and I think at that point we can start to bring this episode to a Kennicott end. That was very bad on my part.
File that one, John.
I would like to take that back. But I would not like to take back our ending, which is called Just One More Thing.
And just one more thing.
If that makes it into the episode.
Maybe. We'll see.
I might kill you or I might hug you. I don't know which. So, with that, Anthony, just one more thing. What would you like to talk about for your final thoughts?
My biggest final thought that I want to talk about was the end scene in which the contact lens essentially is planted in the car.
Or that we learn that it's a plant.
That we learn that it's a plant inside of Robert Culp's car. Brimmer's car, if you will. Robert Culp is the actor. And I just wanted to talk about how on face value it's played off as like, oh, that darn Columbo catching the bad guys no matter what. But the higher ethical issues behind him planting evidence, John, is something that needs to be talked about.
Especially in the age that we find ourselves in, where we're increasingly getting skeptical on the conduct of police. Part of me feels like it's, I don't want to condone it in any way. Part of me feels like, but unfortunately part of me feels like I can, because one, Brimmer is a stuck-up jerk who needed to get caught. I mean, he had to, if he was a regular, or a calmer person in society, he would have just, called the police, said it was an accident. But then, he was more concerned about protecting his career. Yeah, but it doesn't excuse the fact that Columbo did, place false evidence. But I mean, we don't get the court trial. We don't know if he's admitting that into evidence. It feels like it's just TV trope logic, where it's just like we're going to get them to confess by tricking them into thinking we have something more than we do, which I don't necessarily know if that's completely illegal.
That's what I was going to mention. Like, I can't say, because again, I don't really know the laws that well, but technically it can be conceived that what he did was legal, but on an ethical ground is highly unethical.
Yeah, and it becomes more
of a question of, is it more important that we have an evidentiary chain, or we're paying attention to the actions of the suspect? So assuming that we had the evidence that we're saying we're having, at the end of the day, Brimmer still broke into a building to search a car for the most random thing, and only the murderer would do that.
And if Brimmer has a solid defense attorney, which I imagine he would because of how lucrative his business has been, a defense attorney could possibly get the confession tossed out because the confession comes right after the contact lens is found.
Which Brimmer assumes is the actual lens, not a plant. But I mean, you have on top of this the ring.
Yeah,
you have on top of it.
You have a lot of evidence leading up to this point. A lot of these little things, like Columbo said, that add up. You have motive, you have means, you have opportunity, you have all of these things up to that point. It's just the confession would be the thing to really nail him, to actually send him off, and that's what Columbo normally gets from all of his perps. But the fact that the confession comes right after this planted evidence is discovered, that again, if it's a defense attorney worth their salt, I would imagine, could argue to get that tossed out of evidence. But again, we don't see that.
Yeah, and to add on top of that, I don't think necessarily motive is the most motive isn't a part of what we would be talking about here. What this is a heat of the moment, a moment of passion type of murder. So, the fact that he doesn't really have motive because the motive just came out of nowhere and it was based off of his rage.
I mean, you could argue that she was going to, lead to his downfall by coming with the truth and all of that. So there is a motive per se, but the actual crime of the murder was in a heat of passion. It wasn't an actual premeditated, I need to kill this woman. So again, we're splitting hairs at this point. Yeah. But the bigger picture, John, on my one more thing was just I would call unethical use of Columbo to get his man, and did the means justify the end?
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit more leeway that you can or a little bit more. I wouldn't leeway is I think the wrong term, but a little bit more support for your argument when you look at the conversation he had with the golf instructor, which is, I think, equal parts intimidation and a little bit of an illegal search, because he's exploring the contents of a calendar, even though that calendar, I think there's a little bit of wiggle room because that calendar is out in the open.
Yeah, that's out in the open. It's already been flipped open. Which is
foolish on the part of the instructor. But, the nature of that conversation with that instructor and how Columbo conducts himself is very much Columbo using the authority of his position to get that instructor to feel both scared and comfortable with the fact that Columbo has something that he has over him.
Exactly. But again, just overall, it's a very slippery slope to be walking by Columbo regarding that.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a couple times where we come up against this slope again, so it might be worth discussing a little bit more in detail the next time we come across Columbo kind of pushing the lines. Very much pushing the lines.
And speaking of things that need to be pushed, I also, John, need to push my last final thoughts of how much I loved Robert Culp as an actor. I think he highlights – I don't think any other actor could have done – like Jack Cassidy couldn't have been this character.
No.
I think Robert Culp, for all he's worth as a pros pro, brought this performance to the next level and made this episode a grand Columbo episode. It being only the second technical episode of the entire series.
It is to bolster that, Anthony. Robert Culp is one of the, I think, ultimate examples of what a Columbo villain can and should be. There's a few others that fit that mold. Jack Cassidy certainly is among them. But what I appreciate about Robert Culp in particular is, and we've mentioned this many times before during this episode, is how well he's good at conveying rage.
Yes.
And maintaining that rage in a believable fashion. Because I can think of some actors who would definitely be
cartoonish. Whereas, when Robert Culp is expressing that anger, that rage, that frustration, it feels like this is a human being doing it.
Exactly.
And there's, and what he also does something similar to what Jack Cassidy does, where he is still charming. He's still, very sly. I don't necessarily think Brimmer is the most clever of people, considering that he put himself in a position where he was, unless he absolutely got what he was looking for the first try, he was shooting himself in the foot multiple times. So, like, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate my thoughts here, because I don't feel like a private investigator worth their salt would take such a risk like that unless they needed something out of it. So maybe, and this is just like adding extra detail that's probably not there.
Well, essentially, he runs an information broker, right? Information is power, and there is truth to that, because, again, with information, you can sell it. You can use it to foster future relationships.
Mm-hmm.
There's many uses for it. It's its own currency, which he talks to Mrs. Kennicott about it earlier on, before obviously she's murdered, and gives her that proposition. So, but overall, what you mentioned about him not living up to the cut of a private eye because of these minor things, I understand. Essentially why he would do what he did for it. But ultimately, it was his anger, I think, that led to his ultimate downfall, John.
Yeah, and that's the thing that he could not control in the slightest, which, makes sense. Just one more thing before we wrap this up. I would just like to talk about Mr. Ray Milland, because I think he, we don't get much with Patricia Crowley, because she gets dead. But and she's still, she is doing a very good turn as a younger wife who had certainly made some mistakes, but was willing to, try and do what she needed to fix everything. But I appreciated the really quiet moments with Ray Milland. He brought a lot of subtlety to this character, and I appreciated the fact that this episode allowed him to get into those quiet moments a little bit. And even with what little he was given, they were there. It spoke multitudes. Yeah. All in all, I think, we're 4 episodes in now. We're still at the top of the heap when it comes to Columbo.
Yes, exactly.
So I think on that note, we have come to the end, my friends, and we would just like to say our goodbyes. So on behalf of my podcast brother from another mother, he has been Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV. I have been your co-host, John Soares. This has been another episode of the Columbo Files, and we would like to thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Peter Falk, and you've been listening to an episode of the Columbo Files, hosted by the Ludic Lounge. And just one more thing. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Ludic Lounge, Anthony at RojoLoco44, and John at just_John_0891. Or feel free to email us at theludiclounge@gmail.com.